Is death for us a punishment or a consequence? Clearly, you can see from the wording, it is a consequence of what our first parents, Adam and Eve, did. Now, to illustrate what we mean by that is the idea of sin. Sin, we could say, is basically anything that falls short of our Creator's standard. Now, for a moment, picture the car that you have. Imagine the time when it was being put together on the assembly line. And as it went down the assembly line, each person put their piece, installed it on the car. Now imagine if one of the workers decided they were not going to install their piece, and the car went by without that piece installed. Well, we know what we could expect from that car, right? That it would break down because it would be beneath the manufacturer's standard. And so it would break down, and it would eventually die, you could say. In a sense, you could say, when Adam and Eve first came off the assembly line, they were supposed to have all the necessary parts to live forever. But one of the parts that they rejected was a perfect relationship with their Creator. And because of now not having that relationship, it was as if they were incomplete, below standard, and they began to break down and they died. Because we are their children, as a consequence, we all do the same thing. As we're born and come off the assembly line, so to speak, we automatically have that defect in us. Good people die, not because it's a punishment from God, but because it's a consequence of the sin that we inherited. Now the next question, what is the condition of the dead? What is it like to be dead? Please look at Ezekiel chapter 18 and look at verse 4 and verse 20. That's Ezekiel chapter 18. And verse 4 and verse 20. Now we know what is commonly taught about the soul, right? That when a person dies, the soul lives on as if the person just continues to live in a different form. But look at Ezekiel 18:4. Decide if that is based on Bible teaching. He says, look, all the souls, to me they belong. As the soul of the Father, so also the soul of the Son. To me they belong. The soul who sins, which is all of us, is the one who will die. Please look at verse 20. It says, the soul who sins is the one who will die. The Bible teaches then that when a person dies, it's not that they live on or just simply go to another realm. Now that's comforting from this standpoint. When we think about our loved ones, the last thing we want for them is to be somewhere else yearning to be with us. We would not wish that upon them. So to know that they do not, in a sense, live on and simply watch what we're doing and yearn for us is comforting. Now, please look at Psalm 146 and verse 4. This helps us to get a full picture of what we mean by that. That's Psalms 146. Please look at verse 4. Psalm 146 and verse 4. It says his spirit, or you'll notice the footnote says his breath goes out, he returns to the ground. On that very day, his thoughts perish. Now, have you ever seen on a food item that you buy, it will say perishable? Now, we know if it says perishable, we expect that over a period of time, it will no longer be able to be used. According to the verse here, our thoughts, our intellect, our feelings, our emotions in our sinful state are perishable. In a sense, when we die, they're no longer able to be used. Our loved ones, you can understand why we said at the beginning, it's as if they're in the sleeper car, so to speak. When a person dies, it's as if they're in a deep sleep. For us, time has passed. For Brother Carter's children and grandchildren, time will have passed. But for him, it will be as if no time has passed, for he has been sleeping, waiting for a resurrection. Now, what do we know about what the hope is for the dead? Please look at John 5. Can the dead live again? It is answered in verse 28 and 29. Now this is the hope that Brother Carter had. That's John chapter 5. Please look at verse 28 and 29. Jesus says, do not be amazed at this. And, every time I read that, I say, well, how could he think we were not going to be amazed at this? But he was saying, because it's well within Jehovah's power. He says, for the hour is coming in which all those in the memorial tombs will hear his voice and come out. Now just picture that for a moment. All the ones we have lost, including Brother Carter, according to this verse, are still in the memorial tomb sleeping. But the day will come when Jesus will call and they will come out. Now fast forward and put yourself there for a moment and think what that will be like. As his family and friends, we know some of his favorite foods, some of his favorite hobbies. We know maybe what his favorite television programs were, some of his favorite colors. We know these things. Well, just imagine that day, because our God is a God of order. Imagine a day when the Carter family gets a notice, maybe in the mail, that says Brother Carter is going to be resurrected. Imagine when you get that notice, the feeling that you'll have of anticipation. For you remember all the things that he used to like, and maybe Sister Carter will go into action to be able to begin getting his favorite foods and everything together. Imagine the meal that you'll have that day for the first time when you sit down together again as a family. The first time that you lay eyes on him will just be a marvelous time. Now we want you to imagine that you're talking to him to the wee hours of the morning, because you'll want to catch him up on everything that happened since the time of his death. And you want to tell him how many people came to his memorial service that showed their support and love. Now just imagine, what time will that be? Well, it's probably going to be the wee hours of the morning, because you'll be catching him up. And by the time you go to sleep, imagine the prayer that you will say to Jehovah in thanking him for his loving kindness. Brothers and sisters, the resurrection is going to be a marvelous time that we anticipate. Here's an interesting detail about the resurrection, though. We want you to think of it like this. Let's go back to that car. Remember we said we have a car that breaks down. If the manufacturer knows it was their fault, what do? Well, they have what they call a recall. And they may ask for thousands of cars to come back. Have you ever gotten one of those notices in the mail? Some of us ignore those notices, don't we? Well, we hope that you will not ignore the notice at John 5:28 and 29 that Jehovah is staging the most massive recall ever in history. Billions of humans will return from the dead. He will fix the defect in them, and they will live forever. But will we be there? Will we ignore this recall, or will we do what's necessary to be there to have our defect fixed? Now, the beautiful thing is that Brother Carter, he wished for all of his family to be there. And I'm sure if we had a show of hands, did he ever sit you down and talk to you about Jehovah from the Bible? We know that everyone will say he did, and he worked hard. Now imagine the feelings of joy he'll have when he comes back to know that all of us did what it took so we could be there to see life everlasting. Now, the one thing we don't want to discourage any of us is,